So then today, the Saturday after the Ash Wednesday, and we'll read only the I'm good to be here again in Charlotte. So I'm a little bit behind schedule, but patience is one of the virtues you have to work on, but it's good to wait a little bit. So in any case, the epistle for this Saturday after Ash Wednesday, we'll go ahead and read it, taken from Isaiah chapter 58. Thus saith the Lord God, if thou wilt take away the chain out of the midst of thee, and cease to stretch out thy finger and to speak that which profiteth not, when thou shalt pour out thy soul to the hungry, and shalt satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise up in darkness, and thy darkness shall be as the noonday. And the Lord will give thee rest continually, and will fill thy soul with brightness, and deliver thy bones. And thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a fountain of water, whose waters shall not fail. And the places that have been desolate for ages shall be built in thee. And thou shalt raise up the foundations of generation and generation. And thou shalt be called the repairer of the fences, turning the paths into rest. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thine own will, and in my holy day, and call the Sabbath delightful, and the holy of the Lord glorious, and glorify him, while thou dost not thine own ways, and thine own will is not found, to speak a word. Then shalt thou be delighted in the Lord, and I will lift thee up above the high places of the earth, and will feed thee with the inheritance of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. And the Gospel is taken from that according to St. Mark, chapter 6. At that time, when it was late, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and Jesus alone on the land. And seeing his disciples laboring and rowing, for the wind was against them, and about the fourth watch of the night, he cometh to them walking upon the sea. And he would have passed by them. But they, seeing him walking upon the sea, thought it was an apparition. And they cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he spoke with them and said to them, Have a good heart, it is I, fear ye not. And he went up to them into the ship, and the wind ceased. And they were far more astonished within themselves, for they understood not concerning these things, concerning the loaves, for their heart was blinded. And when they had passed over, they came into the land of Gennesareth, and sat to the shore. And when they were gone out of the ship, immediately they knew him, and running through that whole country, they began to carry about in beds those that were sick, where they had heard he was. And whithersoever he entered into towns, or into villages, or cities, they laid the sick in the streets, and besought him that they might touch but the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made whole. Those are the words of today's Holy Gospel. In the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, amen. So in the beginning of this great season of Lent, entering into a great battle, like the apostles when they were on the Sea of Gennesareth, on the Lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Gennesareth, and they were traveling across the sea, and our Lord walked on the water, walked past them. And the church is remember the church is that boat, the boat of Noah that was in the great storm of the flood, and the boat of St. Peter, the bark of St. Peter that crossed multiple times this Lake of Gennesareth, this sea, which in fact is a small sea, but is given to many storms, many great storms, because of the winds rolling off the hills and mountains, creating great storms in the little sea. And and the winds were contesting them this particular day. And the wind, says the fathers of the church, can equal heresy. The winds are false doctrine. The blowing of wind. The wind is considered false doctrine is likened to the wind because it blows, it makes a lot of noise, it creates a lot of damage, it sinks ships, it breaks trees, it does all kinds of things. And when it passes, there's nothing left because it has no foundation. Whereas Christ, his doctrine is like a rock. And the rock is not blown by the wind. And the rock is stable. And you can build upon a rock. And a rock is the exact opposite in every way of the wind. So the doctrine of Christ is like a rock. And the doctrine of the devil is wind. The wind blows. And it makes a lot of noise. And it can even sink ships. And this particular day, the wind is blowing. And it's creating waves. And the apostles have gotten the boat without Christ. And they've tried to cross the sea without Christ. And they're rowing hard against the wind without Christ. And they are not making it. They should have easily made it across the sea, because it's not a very big sea, the Lake of Gennesaret, the Sea of Galilee. They should have made it by this time, but they were stopped by the winds. And why were they stopped by the winds? Because the boat, with all its oars, and the boat with its sails, and the boat with modern engines, and the boat with everything that is needed to make it go from one place to another, cannot defeat the winds. Christ, however, without a boat, without anything, just walks on the water, walks against the wind, walks in the high sea. One of the sea, as also the fathers tell us, the sea that is turned up is the passions and sin, the drowned souls, and the wind picks up the sea, and it makes it throw the boat, and so that the wind of false doctrine always rouses the passions. One thing, for instance, we notice about all heretics are impure. All heretics go to impurity. All heretics turn to greed, and they turn to envy, and to sloth, and anger, and all 7 of the capital sins manifest themselves in heretics. And heresy, in fact, is simply a way of justifying sin. That's all it is. And so the wind blows, so that the passions may be justified. And the wind blows against the bark of Peter, the bark of St. Peter. But here you find a case where the bark of Peter, with Peter in it, is on the sea. And it is going across the sea. And there is a storm, and the boat cannot get through. And this is the situation in the Holy Roman Catholic Church right now. The church is the bark of Peter still, and they're rowing against the sea, and they are not succeeding. And there is great death coming to many souls inside of our church because they're rowing without Christ. And the answer is, you have 2 choices. You can either be in the boat with all these apostles, or you can be out of the boat with Christ. And this is the Gospel of St. Mark, who doesn't mention what St. Matthew mentions that happened this particular day, and that is that this is the day that Peter stepped out of the boat. The day that St. Peter also walked on the water. Now there are several things we notice about this particular crisis in the church. St. Augustine tells us, every time we see that boat, the boat of St. Peter, every time we hear about it in the gospel out of the sea, there's a storm. There's trouble. And it is even in danger of sinking one particular time. And this boat cannot do anything without Christ. Christ is asleep. They are in danger of sinking. Christ is not inside the boat, and it is impossible for them to cross. Because Christ is the captain of the boat of our ship of the church. And so the church is the bark of Peter, and outside the church there is no salvation. And yet, this bark, without Christ, cannot make it to its destination. And this bark, without Christ, cannot save souls from the sea. It cannot save souls from the wind. And there is perishing that will happen everywhere inside of this bark when Christ is asleep and when Christ is outside the boat. There is no other boat. But there will be times when this boat is tossed by the seas. And St. Augustine says it will be tossed throughout the whole of history. Because there will always be heresies that will try to tilt this boat over, try to tip it over with the terrible winds. There will always be the passion of the sins, which the heresies will try to pick up in order to fall inside of the boat, in order that it might be filled with water and then drowned. And so that their heresies and sins will always be in the world, and the church will always have to contend with them. But there will come a time in the church, which is where we are right now, where the apostles and Peter are in the boat, they can't defeat the winds, and they don't know why. So Pope Francis and Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II and all these popes since Vatican II, they are going to make the church fit with the world. They're going to make the church fit with modern times. And by doing so, they're going to conquer the world. And by doing so, they're going to make the church lovable to the world. And by doing so, they're going to make the church grow. And what happens? They cannot row against the wind. And what happens? 1 billion Catholics, and the vast majority of them do not believe in the Catholic faith. Millions and millions and millions, in fact, hundreds of millions of Catholics left the Catholic Church in the greatest exodus that has ever happened since the beginning of the church, which was actually 6,000 years ago, not 2,000 years ago. It was just the New Testament beginning of the church 2,000 years ago with Christ. But the greatest exodus from the church since the beginning of time. Because the Pope and the bishops are trying to row a boat against winds and row a boat in the sea without Christ on the boat. So what do? We do what St. Peter did. First of all the apostles, they see Christ walking by. And in fact, God always shows himself. He always shows himself. The apostles see, all the members of the ship see, there is Christ. At first they say, they know it's him, they see it's him, but what do they say? And the gospel tells us, they thought it was a ghost. They thought it was a ghost. Somehow, ghosts are not real. And this is the way it is in our time now. Ask the Pope. He doesn't believe Jesus Christ, the man of history, rose from the dead. He was just a ghost. He doesn't believe Jesus Christ is the only true God and true man. He doesn't believe he's the second person of the Blessed Trinity. He believes he's just one of the many manifestations of the one universal God that is manifested in our Christian religions and manifested in Hinduism and manifested in Islam and manifested amongst the Jews. And our manifestation is this Jesus figure that walks around and had 12 apostles. And so he doesn't believe he's real. He's just a ghost. He's just a chimera. He's just a mirage. And so they look outside the boat and they see a mirage. Now some, mirages can come in multiple sizes, so to speak. Some mirages are so faint you can't tell what they are. And these are the ones that don't have almost no belief of Christ. You can't identify it. It's just some kind of a shape that's possibly a man. It might even be Christ. Other mirages are so realistic, like they're doing now in Hollywood. They're making these mirages that are so realistic that you can see the sweat and you can see the face and it looks so real. Once you find out maybe it's not breathing. You find out it can't eat. You find out it doesn't take it. If you touch it, your hand goes through it. But when you look at it, it looks so real. And then you have all the different levels in between. Like you see a TV show from the 70s, it's got better color than the 60s. TV show from the 80s got better color than the 70s. TV show nowadays got more high definition, got more dots per inch. And they're all the same. Dots, not reality. And so there's different levels of heresies, different levels of lies, different levels of understanding, all of which are seen a chimera. And so they say, it's not really Christ. We don't really believe it's Christ. And we're seeing something that's a ghost. So here comes Christ really walking by, and we say, oh, it's just a ghost. It's not really Christ. Because obviously, as a good Catholic, you know that Christ must be in the boat. And Peter is under Christ. So if Peter says, row unsuccessfully, if Peter says, let's be tossed about by the winds, if Peter says, take some of the water and put it inside the boat, Well, then we got to listen to Peter, because after all, he's the Pope. He wants to drill a hole in the bottom of the boat, drill a hole in the bottom of the boat. Let's air in. If he wants to pour water in the boat, let him pour water in the boat. He's Peter. If he wants to turn it in the wind so that it might tilt and be capsized, let him turn it in the wind. If he wants to let all the passengers on board be thrown overboard and drown, well, it must be God's will. Meanwhile, the Christ that's walking across the sea, oh, that's just an image. That's not really important. That's just an image. And they were disturbed. Why were they disturbed? They were disturbed for the same reason that the soldiers were disturbed on Good Friday morning and Good Friday afternoon. Good soldiers were putting a man to death. They put men to death every day. There was nothing to be disturbed at. There was nothing to be afraid of. But they were disturbed. And Caiaphas was disturbed, and Annas was disturbed. We've got him captured. We've got him surrounded. We've got him scourged. We've got him crowned with thorns. He's even now nailed to the tree. But what if he escapes? What if he tries one of his miracles? What if he escapes so many other times? And even when he's dead, he did say he would rise. Of course, he can't rise. We don't believe that. But he did say he would rise on the third day. And what if those cowardly apostles come and steal the body in order to save themselves? We've got to protect against him rising from the dead. And what if he really rises? We need to put a heavy stone in front of that tomb so that he can't lift it up. Make sure it's strong enough to where no strong man can lift it up. And so we've got to make sure he stays dead. We've got to make sure. We know, of course, he can't rise, but what if he does? They're disturbed. And why are they disturbed? For the same reason that every soul that says he doesn't believe in God is disturbed. For the same reason every soul that says he doesn't believe in the Ten Commandments is disturbed. Because he knows there are commandments, and there's 10 of them, and he's not living according to them. He knows that there is only one true God, and even if he denies it, he can't cover his conscience. And he knows when he dies, he's going to face that God. When he dies, he's going to be judged by that true God, and if he doesn't change, he will be judged with, "Depart from me, accursed, into everlasting fire." He's not just afraid of judgment. Like when you go to the court and you got a small claims case, are you going to win the $5,000 fine, or are you going to receive a $5,000 fine? You don't know, so you're worried. This is not the worry of the sinner. He knows. He knows exactly he's going to be damned. He knows exactly he's worthy of eternal judgment. He knows exactly the outcome. That's why he's worried. He's not worried because it might go badly. He's worried because he knows it will go badly, and he tries to cover his conscience. So they all think it's a ghost out in the sea. Christ is walking by the boat right now. He's walking by the boat. The boat of the church is in danger of sinking. 1 billion souls, 99% of them don't believe in the teachings of the church. 99% of them are living in the state of mortal sin, and they like it. Even though they're unhappy, they like it. They prefer that state to following Christ. And so they're looking for someone to heap up lies to them, as is recorded by St. Augustine, when he says, or St. Paul says to St. Timothy, that at the end of the world they will have itching ears, and they will heap up to themselves liars, to tell them things that they want to hear, and everyone according to their own level. Like in our little battle, the Society of St. Pius X, we see Bishop Fillet right now betraying the Catholic faith. We see Bishop Fillet right now saying that the new Mass is legitimately promulgated, that Pope Francis loves souls. Pope Francis is a good man. He cares about those that are marginalized. And he sees us as marginalized. The loving Pope Francis that is smashing sisters and throwing them out of convents. The loving Pope Francis is sending Cardinal Burke to Guam because he said about the dubia. The loving Pope Francis that has a history from the time he was ordained a priest until this day of cruelty. He was famous in Argentina for his temper and for his memory of an elephant, and that the famous characteristic of Cardinal Bergoglio and Bishop Bergoglio and Father Bergoglio is he was a master of revenge. That's what he's famous for. If you stubbed his finger and it took him 30 years to get vengeance, he will get it. famous for being a tyrant, famous for crushing people that get in his way, well known as a man of wickedness from the time he was in a priest until this very day. And he still operates the same as Pope as what he did before. And what does Pope Bishop Fillet say? He's a good man. And what do we hear? We hear what we want to hear. Why? Because he's handing over the Society of St. Pius X and Catholic tradition to the enemies of God that they might be destroyed. And we don't like it because we're comfortable there. And therefore, we hear what we want to hear. And so it is with the Pope. And so it is with the bishops. And so it is with the government. And so it is with all things. And this will be one of the signs of the end of time, says St. Paul to St. Timothy. They will see war. There will be war. They will say peace, peace, peace. They will say peace, peace, peace. But there is no peace. This is our time. They will heap up themselves liars, telling them what they want to hear. Everything is fine. Because you know what? I hate to break it to you, but there's a storm out there. This is not a day to go for a swim in the sea. There's a storm out there. And Christ is outside the boat. There's only one thing to do when you see Christ. Go where He is. There's the only thing you can do. And if Christ is outside the boat, it's time to leave the boat. Christ gets in the boat, it's time to get back in the boat. And hence St. Peter, in his wisdom, St. Peter saw Christ, and first he didn't believe it was Christ because he didn't really have the faith. Then he understood it was Christ. Christ turned and said, "It is I, confidite, have confidence, it is I, fear not." And once he knew it was him, Peter jumped out of the boat. He jumped out of the boat and went into the sea, into a storm that was sinking the boat. But it could not sink Peter because it had his eyes on Christ. And then the gospel tells us, as he walked far away from the boat, because Christ was some distance from the boat, and he was halfway between Christ and the boat. He was far from the boat, and he was far from Christ, but he was going to Christ, walking on the water. But then the gospel tells us he did two things. He took account of the wind, he took account of the waves. And when he took account of the wind and the waves, he began to sink. And he tells us what we're supposed to do in this time of great crisis. Let the heretics say their heresies. Let the liars say their lies. Let the evil men do their evils. Let them shoot their weapons. Let them attack as they wish. What's the mistake for us? To take account of them. We should not take an account. We should not worry. We should not try to dodge the bullets. The bullets will miss us if we look at Christ. The bullets will not hit us if we keep walking towards Christ. And He is the truth. For though He's walking on the water, He is the rock. And the water cannot damage the rock. And the wind cannot move the rock. If the rock goes in one direction, it shall not be stopped by water. It shall not be stopped by wind. If the rock stops, it shall not be moved by water. It shall not be moved by wind. And if we go to Christ, who is the rock, and then we cannot be damaged. And so our Lord Jesus Christ said to St. Peter, they were no longer Simon, thou art now Peter, thou art the rock. He's transferring the rock of Christ into St. Peter. He's supposed to be the rock, the true vicar of Christ. And now what happened to the rock? The rock is worried about the wind. The rock is worried about the sea. And what happens when a rock worries about those things? It sinks. And hence St. Peter sinks. And this is what's happened to our recent popes. They are rocks that are afraid of water. Stupidity. They are rocks that are afraid of the wind. And remember, a wind cannot move the rock. If the rock moves, it's of its own free will. The water cannot move the rock. If the rock moves, if it's of its own free will. And the rock has decided not to follow Christ anymore. But he's still the rock. St. Peter is still the rock. And he sinks. And then he calls on the Lord, save us. And our Lord comes and pulls him out of the water. And then the apostles call them to the boat. And they come into the boat. And as soon as he arrives on the boat, the wind ceases. And the rain and the river and the water ceases. And we must understand that about our particular crisis in the church right now. It is a global crisis. and it shall cease suddenly. It shall cease suddenly by a miraculous intervention of heaven. And what are we supposed to do between now and then? Keep our eyes upon Christ. Take no account of the wind of modern lies, the wind of modern heresies. Do not look for excuses, each according to our level. In the Society of St. Pius X, they're looking for excuses and saying, well, Bishop Fillet hasn't signed the paper yet. He signed over the faith 5 years ago. The paper is signed. We already gave up the faith. We already said the new Mass is good. We already said Vatican II is according to God. And he already said multiple times in interviews, we are now within the church. We are within the modernist church. Which means we're leaving the Catholic Church. We're within the modernist church. We're approved by these modern bishops. We're not just the confessions, but we even have a canonical trial that we're following the bishop, the Pope. And we think he's wonderful. We know he's not perfect, but he's basically a good man. Remember when Pope Francis became Pope? Don't worry. Now you see, with Benedict gone and Francis in, we'll never make a deal with Rome. When the conservative cardinal left and Cardinal Mueller took his place, oh, don't worry. We'll never do anything with Cardinal Mueller in charge of the Ecclesia Dei. And what happened? We continued exactly as we were. Continuing to betray the Catholic faith, the Catholic tradition. Now inside of the resistance, what do we have? Bishop Williamson and the priests with him are saying the new Mass is good. Well, we need a bishop. No, we need Christ. We need the true faith. That's what we need. And it's the only way through this storm. It's the rock, which is immovable, that is the stable place. We must stand upon that rock. And this is the immovable rock, which is our holy faith. And the rock was Christ, says St. Paul. And the rock is St. Peter. And St. Peter is the rock, who has now forgotten that he's a rock. He put down his tiara. He doesn't believe he's a rock anymore. He doesn't act like he's a rock anymore. He doesn't believe he's a rock anymore, but he still is. And when he converts, as our Lord said he would in Luke chapter 22, when he converts, he will strengthen the brethren, and there will be a great victory. But what are we supposed to do between now and then? We must stay firm in the truth and stay firm in the rock of our holy faith. We must have to do that. We go out to Christ in the storm. We cannot play games with this holy faith. And it's happening now at each level. Many souls are worrying. Well, we need this human concern. We need the Pope's approval. No, we don't. We need Christ's approval. And when the Pope goes back to Christ, we have his approval. We need the bishop's approval. No, we don't. We need Christ's approval. And when the bishop goes back to Christ, we have the bishop's approval. We need our little bishops and traditions approval. We need the 4 bishops of the society. And now you got 6 of them running around. We need the bishop's approval. No, we don't. We need Christ's approval. And when those bishops go back to Christ, we will have their approval. And if we never do, we don't need their approval. We stay with Christ. And the victory is ours by staying with Christ. The Blessed Virgin Mary stood at the foot of the cross and she did not move. St. John didn't understand that, but he knew enough to know, stay next to Mary. And therefore he stood at the foot of the cross because he was next to her. And therefore he became the true son of Mary. Woman, behold thy son. And she became his strength and his everything. And in the name of St. John, all of us became the children of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And so you just happen to be at the right place at the right time. What's the right place? The cross. What's the right time? The crucifixion. And the church is now experiencing its crucifixion. So we must be at the cross. We must be where Christ is. And now Christ is alone in the sea. Therefore we must be alone in the sea with him. And then what will happen? When he comes back in the boat, he will bring us with him, as he brought Peter with him back into the boat. And we need not fear. Whereas those in the boat, they may drown. Those who are outside the boat in the midst of the storm with Christ, they shall not drown. And there's where we have to be right now in this present crisis of the church. It will pass. It's only a temporary crisis. But we must stand firm, absolutely firm, in this situation in which we find ourselves. And stay firm in the faith, play no games of the faith, and work for the salvation of souls next to Christ. That's what we have to do. So God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.